This is Inner Healing Paths podcast. Here we discuss the healing of the mind, body, soul, and spirit through a variety of different paths. We have emotional and spiritually minded conversations centering on ancestral healing, psychology, astrology, yoga, meditation, magic, and indigenous spiritual practices of the world. I am your host, Rosa Shetty, and I am so happy you are here. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Rosa. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Thank you for joining and listening to this episode. So I have prepared an episode with mental health therapist Sofia Mendoza. She's a licensed clinical social worker from California. And Sofia came on the podcast to talk about her creative process. She has written over 30 publications that are widely available. And she talks about how she was able to connect to her creativity, how this has been an integral part of her healing. We also talk about reconnecting with her roots, to her ancestors, her abuelitas, and how she has implemented just in her everyday life, little things that bring her back and honor the memory of those that came before her. We talk about making pupusas and how she was able to tap into that, and now is something that she shares with her little one, with her mom, and it's a wonderful story that I can't wait for you all to listen. And I'm just so grateful to Sofia for agreeing to be on the podcast, and for all the wisdom and the stories that she shared. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. You can also leave a review. As you know, that really, really helps boost our presence here on Apple Podcast. And also want to let you know that I still have a free inner child meditation journal that you can download for free, and the link is in the show notes, so definitely check it out. Before we go to the actual episode, I do want to give a brief disclaimer that this episode does not treat or diagnose any physical or mental health condition. This episode does not substitute for healthcare or mental health services. Guests have a right to share their opinion and perspective, and this does not constitute an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. So without further ado, here's my interview with Sofia. Take a listen. Hi, Sofia. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I feel so honored that you asked me to come on.
Yes, definitely. It was lovely getting to know you in Puerto Rico, and we connected there. And I just thought your story, your healing work, everything that you do is just so fascinating. And I think it would be such a value for the community, for folks to know a little bit more about you, your story, and everything that you do. So to get started, tell us a little bit about yourself for the folks that don't know you, and the healing work that you do.
Okay. So my name is Sofia Mendoza. I am a licensed clinical social worker here in Long Beach, California, in Neighbor land. Let's see, I do a lot of different things, but in terms of the healing work, I'm a therapist in private practice here. I have a small private practice where I see mainly first generation professionals. I want to say that specialty kind of found me, when I branched out into private practice. Those were the kind of folks that were drawn to me. And I think it was because of the relatability. And I work best with people who are like me, first gen, child of immigrants. So that's my population there. I see a lot of folks with, the majority of trauma. I practice through a trauma and social justice lens. And then aside from that, I'm also the author of the Mending Roots Coping Guides collection, which is a collection of journals and workbooks, stationery, all with like a mental health theme or Latinx theme, kind of, for representation. I like to say that I make products that I like to carry around. I make products that I'm proud to represent my ethnicity, my background, but also, mental health. Like I have a gratitude journal that's called Resilient Like a Cactus Flower, and so it's a little bit both of my heritage, but also the mental health theme. So I do I do a little bit of a lot. But in terms of healing, those are the two main things. Oh, actually, this third one is really important too. This year, I actually branched out into mentoring. So I mentor other therapists who are also wanting to put their medicinas out in the world, mainly, therapists of color. Um, this has been such a great and rewarding venture for me because I realize I'm much I in terms of like coaching and mentors, I'm much more of a mentor. And I absolutely love the process of working with someone who, like, I've been in those same shoes, but who are kind of doubting themselves and their creativity. But they know that they practice from such an authentic place, and they have really amazing ideas of how to put this out into the world. And so I work with them to, carry out their ideas, worksheets, journals, things of that nature. So I feel like that was important to shout out, because um I think that creativity heals us, you know, and for those of us who are creative entrepreneurs, it's so vulnerable to put yourself out there. And so I really love, being the cheerleader and the actual guide that's like, oh my gosh, no, it's so easy, check this out, there's a template for that. you know so like I said, that we can have more of our medicinas out, making a difference.
Yeah, thank you for sharing about yourself. And I want to go back to what you shared about just creativity, and you mentioned, some of the keywords that sound out is trauma and first gen and therapist and mental health and mentoring. And when I hear those words, I just think to just so many colleagues, other therapists that I know that identify as a creative, and you said, but we feel so vulnerable sharing, or many of us are blocked
Yeah.
because of stress and work and the load of just everyday life along with family and all those stressors. A lot of times creative people, and I'm just talking about folks that I know, we end up feeling very blocked and
Mm.
not able to really create. um, have you noticed a lot of especially with the mentoring component, do you get a lot of mental health therapists that say this? Because I feel like I see it so much in our field that is like, well, I used to draw, or I used to sing, or I used to paint or write, and it's almost like it was just left behind. And
Like a past tense, like in another
yeah,
lifetime. Yeah.
right.
Honestly, the folks that I work with, they actually talk a lot about, I have so many things already. Like I've created so many for the people that I work with. Or I have this idea and I have all the thoughts down, but I just need the time to kind of like put it all together. A lot of them also have already done the work. They've been very much like me, why I started creating my own things, because as a bilingual therapist in community mental health, I was creating my own stuff. I was creating my own worksheets, because the worksheets that were online were in English and they just weren't meeting the need of my population. So I want to say it's half of that. Like, I already have created some of this stuff. I just don't know what to do with it. Or it's like half created, right? We all have the half projects in the background. But it's funny that you asked about like the painting and the drawing, and sometimes I will assign someone to do that, um, because it is a part of breaking that block. I think sometimes people feel really guilty for not spending the time on their project, um, or things come up health wise with children or whatnot. um, and I'm a big proponent of really checking the pulse on your creative flow. um, and if it's that you need to rest, that's a part of it, you know um and if you rested or you went to garden, like that was a part of this creation, because sometimes just taking that breather and that rest makes all the difference you know
No, absolutely. And it reminds me of, have you heard the book, The Artist Way?
yes, yeah,
Yeah,
I did, I read it.
and
Mhm.
I don't know if it's the first chapter, one of the early chapters, the author talks specifically about therapists and how so many therapists, um, specifically in mental health, want to or were at some point writers or some kind
Mhm.
of artists in some way, and through this career path, in a way feeds or feeds that part indirectly, because we're listening to stories, we're
Mhm.
sculpting our therapy sessions and creatively thinking of how we can help, within that 45-minute 50-minute hour, we're very actively engaged and creative and using our creativity. So she found that correlation. It's just that it was
Mhm.
so interesting. And I mean, like I said earlier, just for what the people that I know, I see so many creative folks just in my group of colleagues and friends.
Yeah, yeah. I can see that. I can see that. Artwork and creativity, I feel like a lot of creatives and artists, they are very like emotional people, in a great way, because it's what makes their art so beautiful.
Hmm. Yeah,
They're able to
absolutely.
be in that emotion mind and capture the essence of what they're feeling, or something like and I think about like movies and songs, and like you need emotion, you need human emotion. It's why we love them, right? And so it's not a surprise to me that therapists are also artists and creatives, because yeah, we're visualizing stuff like that, and very much in tune with the emotions part.
Yeah, absolutely. And just want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. So you specialize with first gen folks, and it sounds like it's something that is very close to your heart. And I'm just wondering, how has your own journey, whether healing or just evolving in life, how has it correlated with your path and your career? How has that evolved for you side to side?
Yeah, that is a really big question. you know like how do I encapsulate it all? But
Yeah.
I think I see healing on a spectrum, and I don't see it as a destination. you know I think it's always our journey, right? And so for me, my healing has like had so many different iterations. I think early on, um as a college student, or like yeah, as a college student, my healing was more focused on success, right? Graduating college, that was something that seems so far. And to me, that was the pinnacle. That was like, oh, once I graduate from college, everything's going to be fine. Once, I'm in a certain income bracket, I'm going to be okay. Like that's all I need. I just need access, right? Um, and then, college came and went, and then there was me. And um in thinking about um like engaging in some of this creativity, I realized it was my first interview out of college for undergrad. And in the interview, they asked me, so what do you like to do for fun? And I usually don't get nervous in interviews or anything, but that question really stumped me. It really stumped me because I realized, like, for the last however many years, I mean, the fun that I was having was really mainly like coping, like spending time with friends, partying, things of that nature. And I realized that I didn't really have a sense of who I was independent of anyone else. And I didn't have any hobbies. And so the beginning of my healing was, and getting in touch with like my inner child, was doing things that I just didn't have access to growing up, and starting some of those things. Like I remember I learned how to crochet when I was in elementary school. I think I was in third grade. And I picked it up, like, or like someone, like, was a friend of mine was in, I was like, I think I know how to do that. And I picked it up, and yeah, like, the muscle memories. So I started crocheting a lot. And then just like, I remember going to Michael's, and for the first time with a little bit of disposable income. And
Mm-hmm.
before, I felt like Michael's was like the rich people store. But really just experimenting with craft
Yeah.
and crafting. And so I think it started off that way. Just like, who am I by myself, and how do I keep myself entertained, Um,
I love that. Yeah, I think it's a doorway to your healing. Just
it is.
you mentioned just connecting to your inner child, but really you connecting to that essence of you that just wants to be in that, and that energy of pure enjoyment and fun, just for you, not
Yeah.
because you're with someone else or for someone or something else. It's just for the enjoyment of that moment, like
Yeah.
crocheting, right? Which
Mhm.
requires that a lot of patience and dedication and mindfulness,
Yes.
and ultimately you can, if you're making a scarf, you can buy the scarf, but there's nothing like sitting down and creating something over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. 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 And I think, like, my love language was developing in a different way too, because I would make scarves for people. Everyone has a Sofia scarf. Everyone in my family, especially when I was in graduate school and broke, everyone got the same beanie. Uh, but
Love that.
yeah, and then, like, now whenever someone has a baby, for a baby shower, I always take a blanket, because I feel like it's my way of, extending warmth to the baby. And the entire time I'm making I'm like thinking of that baby, so I really
So
love that.
sweet.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, my healing has gone through so many iterations. All was fine and dandy until, I became a mom. I think
Yeah.
I've always been very high functioning, but and even like over functioning, and when I got pregnant and when I had my daughter, so much came up that looking back at it now, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how strong the transmission of trauma was, you know um did I
Yeah.
freeze? I think I froze.
Yeah, for a little bit, but
Oh,
but I
okay,
can hear
good.
you. Yeah, you're fine.
And I realized that I was suffering from like postpartum anxiety, but very specifically, um like generational anxiety. I remember, so my mom is from El Salvador, and her first child, I think, died as an infant. I can't remember how many months
Oh,
um,
yeah.
she was, but she died as an infant. And then
Oh,
she went on to have my brother, and then my sister, and then me. I'm kind of like the middle child. But I remember after I gave birth, Rosa, I was
Mm,
convinced that I would have the same destiny
mm,
that because I also had a daughter, so my
yeah,
born daughter would die. And it was just this overwhelming fear and this like certainty that I knew, you know. And I remember I couldn't shake it. And it was one of those like, this is my destiny, you know, and it just, I felt it so strong. And so, you know, after that, you know, I really started looking more like I couldn't DIY it anymore.
absolutely. Yeah, it
Yeah,
opened you
I
up in
couldn't.
different ways. Yeah.
It did. And I was also having a lot of different triggers because she's a girl and she looks just like me, you know? And so like at every stage, I was like, wow, oh my God, I was that age when, or like, wow, oh my gosh, just thinking back to my childhood and different, you know, experiences. And so, you know, at that point, I really relied on the help of my own therapy, which was so helpful. Um, so helpful to just think about like, what does self-care look like now as a mom, as a professional, um, and how am I going to keep moving forward, you know?
No, absolutely. And I can relate to that. And I think so many people can also, so many women. I went through something very similar. I read the book by Mark Wallen, and when I in postpartum, I think I had it before, but I didn't really open it up until that at that point, and is because of the same thing you mentioned, is that this almost irrational, but yet it felt very real, very present, just different types of fears for me,
Mhm.
that suddenly I realized like maybe this has nothing to do with me. And yes, I was anxious, but it felt almost like there was something beyond just what I was experiencing. And that book really helped. And I know you're familiar with that because we talked
Mhm.
about it before. And it's but it's truth, right? So many times we are triggered, we are overwhelmed, and sometimes we don't understand why or how. And it's not even about us, right? It could be from one generation, two, or even three generations before.
Yeah.
And I think just for me at least, really diving into that realization, learning about it really helped my healing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering for you, what has been the role in terms of understanding your own generational patterns, understanding what your mom went through and how it was impacting you? How has, understanding that generational pattern, maybe even beyond your mom, more of that ancestral legacies that we carry, how has that played a role in your healing now? Where do you see it play out at this point in your life, or your healing journey?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, when I think of ancestral stuff, you know, it's only been more recent that I've been more connected to it. And I know you and I had a conversation about this. Like, I don't know that I'm ancestral enough to, you know, to
Yes.
claim
And I
it.
was, yes. And it's like, no, you are, it's almost like
Yeah,
we have ancestors no
yeah,
matter
it's
what.
your
It's like,
birthright.
it's like whether you believe they're actively involved in some other reality or realm or
Yeah,
not, it
yeah,
doesn't really matter, right? It's almost like
right.
I always say, it's like the law of gravity. If you believe in it or not, it doesn't matter. It will still happen. It will still exist.
I love that. I love that.
So it doesn't really, so it was like, no, if you believe it, if you feel
Ah,
it, if you experience it,
yeah,
then
it's
they're
there.
there for you, right? Yeah.
And so I think, you know, to give some context, you know, before I also grew up in a religion that um, like you couldn't idolize figments or anything like that. And so I really felt stripped from my spirituality. And so for a long time, I was like, I don't think I have spirituality because I was conflating it with religion, you know. And so and so now I realize, no, I'm actually deeply spiritual. I rely on, like self-compassion, mindfulness, acceptance, or like being with yourself and your suffering. And then more recently, yeah, being connected to my ancestors. I think something, so we were on this retreat, we're reclaiming our roots. And something that kept coming up for me was my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. Um, and I remember being so frustrated because I wanted to hear her. I wanted to hear her words. And even before the retreat, I would ask my mom, like, do you remember like something she told you? Her mom died when my mom was 12. Yeah,
So
so
you didn't know her. You didn't,
I
of course, you
didn't
didn't have a
know
chance to,
her.
yeah. And your mom,
Yeah.
sounds like your mom may not have either. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And my mom would say, well, era una mujer de pocas palabras. Like she didn't really say much. She was a woman of very few words. Um, so then I started asking my tia. Actually, it's so funny. One day I went out for a walk and I was actually listening to your podcast, one of your like ancestor meditations as I was
Yeah.
walking. And right when it was over, I was like, I'm going to call my tia.
Hmm.
So big thank you to you for that. But I called my
Oh, I'm glad it
tia.
helped.
Yeah, I called my tia and I was like, I know she's going to tell me something because she's a little bit
Hmm.
older than my
Okay.
mom. And she said the same thing. Era una mujer de pocas palabras. Like they didn't really say much. And she goes, they didn't say much. They were also they didn't know how to read and write, and so they didn't have a whole lot of education. um they worked a lot, they cooked a lot. My grandmother was really crafty, with cheese. With like milk, she would make cheese, she would make this, she would make soap, and like, which I think I get that from her. But anyway, I just felt like I needed some words because I'm a words person. I'm like create journals and I'm a therapist. I read, and I just wanted her words, and I didn't
Mm.
get them, but the way it made me realize that I have to change my relationship with silence, which
Yeah.
which for a words person is really difficult. But then also as a creator, it's very difficult because we're relying, well, and even as a human, like we're relying on these mirror neurons, this like communication. And so, but I decided at the retreat that I would be changing my relationship with silence, and I could see her just like caressing me, my hair, and smiling at me, cooking, um, like going like this to me,
Mm.
like embracing me without any words. And I realized that, with love, you don't only have to have words. You can express it in so many ways.
Mm.
Right now, that's kind of where I'm at right now, is really just embracing silence, embracing love, without words. I mean, I'll take the words too.
Yeah.
But now I'm just being really intentional about like what presence feels like without words.
Mm.
And so I think that right now that's the connection that I have with my ancestors. And also, like when I cook, it's very soothing for me, and eating, and I think that's another way that I connect too, with my grandmother, is by envisioning. It's like this, like like envisioning her cooking and now envisioning myself cooking.
Mm. I
You
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's como que la invocas, like you invoke her
Yeah.
energy, or
Yeah.
and some folks don't like to say that word, but it's almost like the equivalent of saying I'm honoring my grandma's memory. It's, we're more
Yeah.
accustomed to saying we honor their memory, but really what we do when we're honoring is kind of calling on or invoking that, whether it's through food or through an activity that that person loved to do. You feel closer in that moment,
Yeah.
especially for you that didn't have the chance to get to know her. It's almost like you do. Just hearing you share about her is almost like you've gotten to know her.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I almost feel like I'm creating my own little relationship with her, and I'm visualizing it and I feel it. I think before I couldn't do that. I could not visualize. I kind of used to think it was BS. I did. And
Yeah.
and there's this exercise that I do with folks in the beginning stages of trauma work, where we create a protector circle,
Yeah.
and then for people with attachment wounds, which I also have, it's really hard. It's really hard
Hmm.
because then there's grief in thinking that
Hmm.
you even have to make someone up.
Right.
There's grief in that acceptance. Um, and so, but now that I gave myself the time and I gave myself to the space to, I feel like really nurture that relationship. Like
Mm.
I do feel it.
Oh my God, that's so beautiful. You know what's coming to mind? I do EMDR also, and with the folks
Yeah.
that I work with, over time, I've noticed that that particular exercise can be, of course, overwhelming for some people that have those attachment wounds, but those that are able to actually, for some of the clients that I've had that are more creative, that have an ability, that are writers that write. What's coming to mind is one of my clients. She wrote scripts, and so she was a creative person. And when we did that exercise, and this has happened to others, but I remember her because it was like so fascinating. Um, she was able to describe a person that came through in her mind's eye that felt like she knew the person, felt
Mhm.
very safe, very comfortable. And it's almost like, I think I'm creating this character, and it just feels very like a grandma and or grandpa, I think she said. Anyways, and I remember that, and I was like, how interesting. What if that really is,
Yeah.
the invocation, or the like calling on, especially with that intention to find that safe person, that safe place to ground when we're feeling overwhelmed. Like, well, what if it really is? I always, so when I do EMDR, I'm always fascinated by that part of EMDR. There's actually a book about it. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I think I have it right here. Give me just one second. Let me
Oh,
see if I can
yeah.
find it. Because I was reading through it the other day. What is it called? It has a little bit of a a name. Oh, it's Induced After Death Communication
Oh, wow.
by
Yeah.
Alan Botkin.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it's right here. So
Yeah, I would have never guessed that that's an EMDR.
no, me neither. I got it. I read through it and I was like, okay, this seems interesting. And I'm into all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, yeah.
and then in reading it, it's all about EMDR work.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into it.
The author doesn't go into a specific protocol, but I've done EMDR for a
Yeah.
few
You
years.
you know what it
So
is. You
I
can,
know what he's
yeah,
talking about because
yeah.
I've seen it in sessions. I've seen patients channel. I don't know if it's a deceased ancestor or their spirit guides, but and I've seen it. So when I saw the book, I'm like, oh my God, this is a thing.
Yeah.
And then I saw I was watching a YouTube podcast the other day, and the therapist talked about the same thing, how they were doing some trauma work, and like few, I mean, they had been working together for a while, him and the client, and suddenly, like, there was the client had their eyes closed, but he was observing because they were doing like some kind of deep meditation, and like, he suddenly saw the light in the room change, and initially he thought, well, it's, the sun is setting, so it was probably that. And then the clients start talking about seeing their mother, and the mother apologizing. It was
Oh,
relevant to what they were working through, and the mother apologizing, and all this. And then after the end of that session, the client got better.
mm-hmm.
Some of the things some of the obstacles they had been trying to work through, it was like almost like a miracle. It was like it was lifted. The heaviness of her experiences with her mother had lifted. It was so fascinating.
Wow. It's like that liberation, or like that closure that they
Right.
needed. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, no, that's fascinating. I think, and it's interesting about the ancestral stuff because I was like, I realized like, oh, I think I mean, I've been doing ancestral work without even realizing that I'm doing
Hmm.
you know like I have some clients with such complex trauma. Like the clients I see, it isn't single incident trauma. It's always complex, various traumas throughout the lifespan. um and and for people with attachment wounds, in like the regular the go-to list, it's like, oh, a celebrity or a movie character that maybe you would like. None of those were landing for certain people. Like they were like, no, that person's this, that person's that. um and once your brain is already like out, you can't access it. And so I remember saying, well, what about your ancestors and people in your lineage? Boom, that's what they felt so connected to. And that's the spiritual part of us, right? That's longing for that connection, and that protection from a source that maybe we can't see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in IFS, internal family systems, it has a component just for that, right? Legacy burdens. And there's a whole component of healing for that. And when I have implemented some of those strategies with my clients, I've noticed that, especially when we're talking about certain parts that feel very ancient, very old,
Mhm.
immediately it's like naturally the clients just go there with, it feels old. It feels like it's 100 years old, and it's in these the legacy burdens just open up in a way. It usually doesn't happen at the initial sessions, but the more we connect with these parts, it's almost like the layers start opening up and all these other parts start moving out of the way. And what you're left with is what is not yours, right? These
Yeah,
legacy burdens that we carry that do
yeah.
not belong, did not start with us. Yeah.
That happened to me at the retreat. That happened to me.
Mm,
I tapped into some really, really painful stuff.
mm,
And and it was really hard because I think it was the exercise was something like, now let's give them back kind of like their burden. And I was like, that feels wrong. Like, how do I give them back violence? How do I give them back depression? How, I mean, I get it with like these like gender norms and roles and things like that. But it just, I think in my lineage, del Salvador, like there's just been so much trauma, so much war, so much violence, so much poverty and famine, um, that it was really hard for me to say, like, here you go, this isn't mine, you know? Um, and then and then one of the extras, well, just like a reflection was like, sometimes we're really bonded to that. And that's where you're at. And so I realized, like, yeah, I was very bonded to it. But I also took that as, and this is why I need to connect more. And this is why I need to connect more with my culture. I need to learn more about like my lineage so that I can also honor the joy, and
absolutely.
like as an artist, as a Central American artist, or I can contribute, and then I can learn, and yeah, just really embody the beauty and the art that came from it.
Oh, I love that. So beautiful.
Yeah.
So it sounds like for you, in terms of your healing journey, is you're on that mode of just trying to learn more about where you come from, and to dive into that part. And I think there's so much, I think, well, I should say, like, our ancestors crave that. They want to be known, they want to be seen, they want to be recognized. And when we make that intention, things happen,
Yeah.
and I was talking, I had, oh my God, I'm blanking on her name, but Irisnei, oh my goodness, Irisnei Flores on the podcast, and she's a genealogist.
Yes.
And
Familiar with her work. Yeah.
yeah, and it's so fascinating. And what we were talking about is how when someone starts just researching very maybe superficially, just doors to start opening. Like suddenly someone, an aunt or a great aunt or a cousin that you had not even thought about, says, hey, I found this picture randomly of you when you were a baby and you're with someone, or I found this picture of your great great grandmother, or I found this letter, or they somehow drop this piece of information that you had no idea, they've never shared. It's like you open that door, and it's
Mm.
like the information starts coming. The it's almost like the symbolism that they want you to know starts coming through different
Wow.
people and different stories, and it's almost like you start putting together this puzzle.
Yeah, yeah. During the pandemic, I first realized that I was connected to my grandmother when, everyone had a pandemic project or 10. And so for me, it was making pupusas. Pupusas are deceptively hard to make. Like the masa has to be just right. Growing up, my tias would say que no tengo manos para pupusas because I have very warm body temperature. So la masa se derrite, like it melts in my hand. And then my mom didn't know how to make pupusas either because she was one of the youngest females, and like the older ones had gone to the city and whatnot. So anyway, she never learned, and actually they told her too, tú no tienes manos para pupusas. So she'd be like, oh no, you know, like your tia will make them, right? So then my mom couldn't teach me. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna learn. I watched so many YouTube videos. I made so many pupusas, ate so many pupusas. Um, and now I'm finally like, I'm getting there, And what's funny talking about EMDR, it's
Oh
bilateral.
yeah,
The
yeah.
torteando is
Mm-hmm.
bilateral. And so like during the pandemic, my mom actually got diagnosed with cancer. And I
Oh,
was
I'm
like,
sorry.
I know, yeah, she's okay now. She's in remission.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so much. I was like walking around the house torteando.
Yeah,
Like I wasn't even hungry, but I was like, I'm just gonna I have all this masa and I'm gonna keep
right.
everything. And I just knew that my body needed to do something and it needed to make pupusas.
Wow, and it's almost like it just intuitively you just knew how
Yeah.
to do it in such an ancestral way.
Yeah, yeah. Like I went to what soothes and comforts, for some,
Yeah.
for in other communities, it's like the drumming, the African drumming,
Mm,
the dancing, and I realized like maybe for the people of El Salvador, it's making pupusas that's also
yeah.
our nervous system.
Mm, I love that. Yeah. And so your mom, she's in remission. She's okay now.
She's okay. Yeah.
Okay, but it
Oh,
must have been
oh,
so scary. Ugh.
yeah, it was. We really went through it. My sisters and I, we all kind of banded together. But no, it was hard. Because I realized I didn't even take time off of work really. So I was like here and there and just watching her go through so much. But it's funny because when my mom saw me learning how to make pupusas, she was like, that's not how your tia makes them. That's not how the masa looks. I think but guess what? She started learning.
She
She told my
she
tia,
learned too.
you're gonna show me how to make pupusas. And
Yeah.
and now maybe my aunt has more patience for her, but she taught her how to make pupusas.
Mm,
She taught my
yeah.
mom at like 70 something years old. And it's like the biggest pride that she has. Now
Yeah.
she can make her ancestral food like that one,
Yeah.
which is a big one for El Salvador, you know.
Oh yeah.
So we shared that during the pandemic. And I just think it's such a beautiful like place to be, you know, because now like we'll make pupusas together, and that's something that I never thought that we'd be able to do because of nuestras manos. But it turns out
Yeah.
we just need, you know, oil on our hands and the will to be like, I'm gonna make these.
Exactly. It's so fascinating, and how when you start connecting intentionally with that, and almost healing through that process of learning how to make pupusas, it's almost like your that energy transferred onto your mom. And I can only imagine, you mentioned the pride, and I can only imagine the healing that she also received unconsciously or
Yeah,
consciously, but
yeah,
she also benefited from that, just that action that you
yeah.
set your intention on.
Imagine being 70 something years old and like unlocking this thing that you've never been able to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
yeah.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about your books. So you have a collection of journals, and is it like just different activity workbooks and worksheets? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. So some of them are just your regular like journals with journal prompts, like one-line journal prompts.
mhm,
Others are coloring books. Like I have a Women
okay.
Boundaries coloring book with like these really cute women images with like a statement. But then also a little bit of journaling on boundaries and like courage cards or courage statements, I like to call them.
Mhm,
Because sometimes we don't know how to say no. And
yeah.
that project came out of like, I needed those words.
Mhm,
So I would write them down, and then I created this journal coloring book. But I also saw children and adolescents for many years. So I like creating mental health activity books for kids. My daughter's 9 now, but I've made one like as she like at every age, just because like I want to make it for her. I feel like everything I make is because I've needed it, me or my family has needed it. And so I think in my brain when I'm creating, it has to make sense to me. Y de allí me nace,
mhm,
because I'm like thinking of what my daughter would like, and I'm thinking of like how to explain it to her in her and you know child ways. And then also like if you can explain it to a child, you can explain it to anyone, which is I love children's books and workbooks.
mhm.
So I have some workbooks for children too. Um, and then stationery and then the coloring books. I have a few coloring books.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
beautiful. I purchased a couple of your books
Thank
for my
you.
daughter, and then but one thing that I noticed, and I'm just realizing this as you're talking about silence, going back to what we were saying, is that some of I have two of what you've made, and what I've noticed is that it requires for you to be in a silent place to even, whether
Mhm.
it's for kids or for you, it's almost like you do the prompt, and then you have to take that pause,
Yeah.
and then you write or you color or you know answer the prompt, but it's almost like you've built in that sacred, I think at the retreat we're calling it the sacred pause.
Oh,
you
right.
you you you
Fun.
mentioned the sacred pause a lot.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
almost like I see how your books is they almost make that happen for
Mhm.
you. You have to sit, turn everything off, and then or with your child, and you have to take that pause, that
Yeah.
moment to
Yeah.
do. So it's so beautiful how
Oh, thank you.
I could see how this is your soul work.
Thank you. Yeah. And I actually, so when I was thinking about like, because it's like therapy related, but I'm not going to have it under my therapy practice. So I still wanted it to be an extension of me and my work. And so I named that this part of my life Mending Roots Healing Spaces, because I feel like the journals are a space for that sacred pause, right?
Right.
And people get to figure out what that space means is for them, because I also have some that I have one that's called, because I work with teenagers, so I have one that's called I don't want to talk about it, but I'll write and draw. So they're like comic book style pages that they can just do anything, and they're these like these beeswax kind of little like hexagon things. And it's funny because that one actually gets purchased a lot. I don't know by who, but that one gets purchased a lot. And I'm like, people get to figure out what that space is. And if they're not expressing themselves through writing, maybe they can draw or scribble or make it into a comic book or something like that, you know? So yeah,
I love
creative
that.
space.
That's a very that what is the title of that one again?
That one, I don't want to talk about it, but
Okay.
I'll write and maybe draw.
Okay. I have a lot of teen nieces and nephews,
And
so
it's
I
black, and it's black. So and
oh
it's so funny. I have one therapist, a friend who in particular, she's always buying those from me. She's like, I'm out. Can I get more?
oh so cool. Yeah, like
And it's
Christmas gifts,
yeah, and it's funny
birthday
'cause
gifts for
that one
teens.
has no content. That's considered
Mm,
like low content book, but it's just blank pages, but in different ways, and they can do whatever they want with it.
but
You know,
it's processing.
it is. It is.
And that's I think for teenagers, I mean, talk about silence, right?
Right?
They say so much with their silence.
Yes. Yeah. And how
Pocas
uncom-
palabras, yes.
and how uncomfortable adults are with silence. I mean, I'm that person too, that I'm like, well, are you mad? Well, let's talk about it. And trust me, nobody in my house wants to talk about it with me. And my daughter's like, we don't have to talk about everything. And I'm
Oh my, like really? Yes, we do. In this house, in this house, we talk.
like, but I know I'm like learning now, because you know every nervous system is different. Like when they're ready to talk, then we'll engage. But I think for me, it has taken a lot to calm my own nervous system in silence, and like really having faith that, you know, in the relationship, and that we will come back together and talk about it when we're both ready to.
Absolutely. No, silence is huge. It sounds like, well, you know, it's no, it's hard to honor that for someone else. And it's so hard to take that pause ourselves, right? To say, you know what, something as simple as disconnecting from social media or electronics. It's like we need that. And I'm talking about myself. It's like I need that noise, whether it's in the background as I'm typing my notes. I need to, you know, it's almost like, why is it so hard to just be okay with silence, having nothing to do or doing nothing, right?
Yeah.
It's
Well, and that's the
hard.
thing. I think when there is silence, we listen to those thoughts, right? This is why like a lot of people have insomnia, and like the thoughts are so loud at night because it's so silent. So
Yeah. No, absolutely. Um, yeah. So, well, thank you so much, Sophia, for sharing your story and the story of your abuelita. And I feel like just in listening to you, I feel like I got a sense of who she was.
hmm.
And so thank you so much for sharing that. And for the folks that would love to purchase your stuff, get to know more about your mentoring and the work that you do, how can people find you? What will be the best place to find you?
Yeah, for the books and the mentoring, www.mendingrootshealingspaces.com. It's a long one. Or at Mending Roots Healing Spaces on Instagram. And for the therapy, Sofia Mendoza, LCSW.com, and on Instagram at Mending Roots Therapy.
And your books are also on Amazon.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
when you go on the website, the link will take you directly to Amazon.
awesome.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast and sharing your story. And I look forward to another conversation with you.
Yes,
And
yes,
maybe with Cynthia, right? We
yes,
actually have a
yes,
pending podcast, the
yeah,
three of us. So
yeah. I feel
hope-
like the three of us, we can talk forever.
yeah, oh yeah. We've s- we experienced a little bit of that in
Yeah,
Puerto Rico.
yeah,
So, well, thank you again,
of
Sophia.
course.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you found it healing and nourishing to your mind and soul. If there's a friend that you think would benefit from listening to this information, please share it. Share about our podcast. If you feel called to, please leave us a review, as this really, really helps boost our presence here in Apple Podcasts, and it makes it easier for others to find us. To stay up to date on new episode releases and special events and projects that I'm working on, you can follow us on Instagram at Inner Healing Paths Podcast. And you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to my website, which is rosashetty.lcsw.com. And I will include this information and links in the show notes. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing with you again next time.